I'm Paula Tkac, Senior Vice President and Associate Director of Research for the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta.
In some sense, functioning on all cylinders. One of the things that is not yet, out to the post expansion peak here is the employment cost index. So this has been a puzzle for us for a long time. If labor markets are so tight, why the heck aren't businesses paying people a whole lot more than they currently are? Why aren't wages growing faster than they are? There are lots of reasons for that, and our RAIN folks have dug into that a great deal. All the strategies that employers are using to try to mitigate their own risk of bringing on more employees and ever increasing and quicker accelerating wages. Bottom line, though, is labor market looks pretty healthy. So if you think about the dual...
For me, I don't know that it was completely a conscious decision. So my PhD prelim exams were in mathematical economics and financial economics. Mostly you choose a prelim based on stuff you're interested in, stuff you think you might want to study more, stuff you want to build a foundation in. So I went down that road initially. Again, I call myself a financial economist, but in the broader scheme of things, I'm really an empirical economist. So I think I have an awful lot in common with folks who do applied micro topics, including oftentimes labor economists, the kinds of data we look at, the things we do, the fact that we look at the cross-section and not just the time series and not just aggregate statistics, but getting inside some of the really granular and complex data. That all is a similar thread, no matter what kind of question or subfield you're involved in. Once I built some expertise in financial markets, partly it's probably driven by the fact that there's a ton of data there, and that became sort of too good an opportunity to pass up, being able to play with that data.
You can read a lot of things in here, but again, these are point estimates that we put in about the best guesses to appropriate policy with risks all the way around inside them, right? And we're now talking about 2 and 3 years out. These are not plans, this is not consensus, this is not a commitment, right? These are, again, senses in which we're trying to be transparent about the differing opinions, and the differing opinions are what makes this job so interesting in terms of trying to prepare for these meetings and for Raphael to figure out how to make the points he wants to make and get his opinion across.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things is to get a better understanding of how monetary policy is thought about, devised, strategized within the Federal Reserve System. I showed a dot plot that the public sees 4 times a year after the FOMC meetings that involve projections. And that plot shows the forecast for the future path of policy by each FOMC participant. I think it's a really good chart because it shows how much diversity of opinion there is around the table. I think one thing people from the outside may not understand is that there's not a lot of groupthink in this organization, within the reserve banks themselves, or at the board, or amongst all of us as a group. And so partly I wanted people to better understand all the things we take into consideration, not just data, but also what private businesses are doing. The Atlanta Fed has a pretty broad regional economic information network where we try to get on the ground, granular, complex context for real economic activity, how businesses are planning and making decisions, how they're responding to events like trade policy, immigration policy, Brexit votes in the UK, geopolitical risk. All of those things can't really be assessed and folded in the best way if you wait until you have all of the data in hand. In some sense, at that point, it's a bit too late. So we try to get ahead of it and fold in sort of a richer narrative around where we think the economy is going in order to best understand how to calibrate monetary policy to meet our dual mandate.
And that comes from the real world. We also go to another source of data, which is our vast network of contacts. So I see a lot of my Fed colleagues in the room, some of whom are intimately involved in talking to the folks that are represented up here. These are private sector businesses. We have a very large enterprise called our RAIN network that seeks to talk directly to businesses on the ground about what's happening in real time. So
website, probably the best known product we have is called GDP Now, which provides a real-time nowcast of U.S. GDP growth in the same quarter as it's being conducted. So Instead of waiting for the official government statistics to come out a month or 2 months or 3 months after the quarter ends, our GDP Now product takes all of the publicly released private and government data in real time and builds a statistical forecast to give the best predictor we can give about what that print of GDP will be for the current quarter. We have something called a wage growth tracker that is often cited in the Wall Street Journal. It is a comparison of the wage growth of workers that are in the same job from one year to the next. So it takes care of all kinds of compositional effects and things in the aggregate data. It essentially asks for the workers that are in the same job, how fast are their wages growing? So it gives us a kind of a new lens on what wage growth looks like in the economy. We also have a market probability tracker that tells us about how financial market participants are forming their expectations about what Fed policy will be in the coming year. That's an important part of what we look at because we want to know that our messages are how those messages are being understood, what the market is expecting. That's part of what will influence longer-term interest rates, and that, of course, will affect financing conditions and feedback into the real economy. So the more we understand about how financial markets parse the events that are going on in the world, everything from an earnings statement to a geopolitical event, but also the things the FOMC is saying about where it sees policy going and the uncertainty around that policy, the more we understand about that, the better off we can do in terms of being transparent and open in our communications and adding clarity